Hey guys, Will here. So now that we've gotten started with NestJS, I'm going to show you how to create your very first API resource. So this is pretty exciting because this is kind of jumping right into the core piece of developing a backend server app using JavaScript. So if we go to the controller section, if you look at this diagram here, you can see a controller is something that services an HTTP request that comes from the client. This could be a React app, this could be an Angular app, a Vue app, it could be just a vanilla JavaScript client-side app making an AJAX request. It could be another API, it could be anything that issues an HTTP request. And that's what our app is going to do. Our backend server app is going to service HTTP requests. So let's go ahead and scaffold out a controller using the CLI to make our life easier. So we'll go to usage, nest generate, or G is going to be the CLI command to generate a new resource or a new item in the app. And since I'm looking for the controller key, I want to use the CO alias. So it's literally as simple as this. Nest, G for generate, CO for controller, and I'll call it the user's controller. So you can see here it went ahead and it generated a user's domain folder, and underneath that it created the actual controller itself and the test file, the spec.ts file. So if I actually open up the user's controller, I can see here I have a basic app or a basic class that's called user's controller with an annotation @controller with the user's key inside. This is going to tell the app this is the user's path on the API. So anything that comes to /users right now is going to be dumped into the user's controller. If I go to the app module, I can see the app controller has been added as a controller for the app module, which is exactly what we want. So yeah, let's go ahead and create our first endpoint. But before we do so, I would like to change the base path of our app. And there's a very important reason why I'm doing this. So when you're creating an API should always have versions associated with it. So as your app grows over time, you can have version 1, version 2, version 3, and as long as you don't introduce breaking changes into a version, and you maintain the integrity of that API definition, that interface contract, you can develop new features and push them out as a new version. That way you don't break your client apps that are consuming your API. So I actually do not remember how to do this off the top of my head with Nest. I think it's set global. Is it global prefix? I have to Google this one. Nest set base path. Yeah, it is the set global prefix. And this is another thing I love about Nest. I can almost Google anything and find the answers, you know, the first click. It's super easy. So we're going to set the global prefix to /API v1. API is the base path and v1 is the version, and then all of our routes come after the v1. So the user's controller is going to be serviced at /API/v1/controllers. So let's go ahead and create a basic get controller. So we want to get all the users. And we're just going to return an array, and for now we'll make it an any type, but we'll say each user has a name, Mr. Foo and Mr. Bar. And it looks like we need to import the get annotation from NestJS, so it actually understands that, hey, this is a get request, and this is going to find all of our users. So yeah, so that'll give us the data for all of the users. So I'm going to go ahead and start the app using my dev hot reload command, npm run dev. I showed you guys how to do this in the hot reload video. So I'm going to go localhost 3000/API/v1/users. And I do get back the 2 users, foo and bar. So this is how you can easily create a controller and wire it up into the app module using that CLI command. So it automatically imports and attaches the app controller, and then you have the controller defined here, and then you can define a custom method. So pretty straightforward, but I don't think we should stop here. I think we should keep going. So let's go ahead and keep going. So the next thing we should do is we should take this controllers file, we should throw it into a controllers folder. Along with the test file. Alright, and we should create a new folder for our data transfer objects, also known as DTOs. So a DTO in our case is simply just going to be a class and this class is going to define all of the properties on a user. So I'm going to export class user DTO, and I'm going to define the fields on it, which are going to be, in this case, just a name, which is a string. That way, in users controller, I can say, hey, this is actually an array of user DTOs that I'm responding. So now I'm really starting to use TypeScript to my advantage, and now when you look at this function, you know, hey, this is actually going to be a user DTO that's being returned from this controller. Better yet, we should introduce Swagger in this video as well, since we're already this far. If I go into probably faster just to Google it, NestJS Swagger. We're going to go ahead and install the required packages for that NestJS Swagger module. And we're going to start looking at the docs here. So it says in the main TS file, we're going to have to add some new code to build the document for the Swagger module. So let's go ahead and switch over to our main.ts file. We can see here, this is where we used Invest Factory to create our app, and here's where we launched the app. In between those two lines, we're going to have to generate the actual Swagger documentation here. So let's go ahead and create a new area of the code where we call the document builder. The document builder is going to be an import from NestJS. This is going to be the NestJS survey app. Title is also NestJS survey. Description, backend API for NestJS survey. and I want it to appear on the URL swagger-UI. And that way I can go to /swagger UI and see my swagger. The last thing I'm going to have to do is actually annotate my controller. So if I go to the controller here, or actually before we get to the controller, I need to annotate my DTO. This is what's actually going to show up in the Swagger doc as a model. So this way I can see exactly what the properties are on this user DTO. So let's go ahead and import the API model property from NestJS Swagger, and we're going to just annotate our name field with this annotation that says, hey, this is a API model property and it's a type string. So if I go back to the controller method, now this user DTO is annotated using the Swagger module. I need to also annotate this controller with the Swagger module as well. So if I go to the example code, and I use a annotation called the API response, or better yet, since we're just getting data and we probably want to return an HTTP 200, we want to respond with an API OK response, meaning we're going to respond with a 200 status code. So I'll go ahead and import that annotation. This is going to be the API OK response. And underneath my get annotation, I'm just going to put @API OK response. Okay, so inside of this, I can pass an object. And this is where the type definitions of TypeScript really come in handy. So I can say, well, it's going to be a type user DTO. Now this might seem redundant because I already added the user DTO to the function, and it is somewhat redundant, but this way simply putting the user DTO on the type of the response is going to allow the Swagger doc to be populated with that type. There's one last thing we're forgetting here. Since this is an array, we have to do isArrayTrue, and that'll tell the Swagger doc, hey, this is actually going to return an array of type user DTO. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start our app one more time using the hot reload command. You can see the API users is still here, but instead of going to API v1 users, we're just going to go to swagger-UI. And voila! It is a fully functional Swagger doc out of the box. If I go here to get users, you can see here, this is exactly what I can expect to receive from the server with a status code 200. I'm going to get an array of objects, and each object is going to have a name field, which should be a string. The model definition can be shown here or down below in the models area. That way I can see exactly what fields are on that user DTO model definition. We can click try it out, execute, and it says cannot get users. So there's probably some small wiring issue here that I haven't wired up properly, but you know, more so this is going to give you guys a really good idea of how you can set up a Swagger doc compatibility with your Nest app. So thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful.